Redditors who quit their jobs in a blaze of glory. What's your story? Quit a summer job as loudly as possible because they were paying a newer employee .50 more than me an hour because her dad was on the city council. It's not what you know, it's who your dad knows. At a college I worked at, the director of student services had been dicked about a lot in the latter part of the academic year. Budgets getting cut, his team being changed, moving offices, etc. Things he said were designed to get him to leave as he had been there for a while and accumulated large bonus payments. Anyway, just before September came around, which is the busiest time of the year obviously, he upped and left. This left the college in a bit of a mess, but they found someone who was willing to do the extra work and we muddled through until the first day of term. We welcomed 700 new students on that first day and directed each of them to the school blog page, which had everything you needed to know on it. Turns out nobody had paid attention to who owned it, and at 9 AM on the first day it went offline. No information for the students, no timetables, no notices or any other documents could be accessed. Absolute chaos. Saw the chap who left in the pub on the Friday after work with the biggest crap-eating grin on. Couldn't help but admire it. It wasn't really a blaze, but I worked in a big oil company and was about to switch jobs due to a better offer. Somehow through connections I learned that my current employer was about to let a lot of people go, so I signed up for my new job with a start date 6 months from then, waited for the announcement of severance packages, then cashed in 12 months payment, effectively earning a dual salary for 1 year, and took a 3-month vacation. I left that job with a huge smile on my face. It wasn't really a blaze, but I worked in a big oil company. That would have been something. Huh. I worked at Boston Market in high school and I had been getting screwed on hours for a month or so. So the new schedule came out and I seen I had 6 hours for the whole week and I was P. The last order I had, a guy came in and just wanted some kids' meals for his 2 kids. I asked him if he wanted anything for himself, but I could tell that he was in a bind with money. Dude paid in all change and barely had enough. Anyways, I went to the back and got him a party platter that we use for catering, and I gave him at least 15 people's worth of food and almost a whole rack of fresh cornbread. I mean, I absolutely hooked this guy the frick up. He had more food than he could carry. I put my apron on the counter and helped him carry it to his car. Dude started crying and all, and after he had it all packed up I just walked home. I think it was a good way to go out. I like this one. You didn't just frick over your boss, you helped someone by fricking over your boss. Literally threw in the towel. Was working a bar for a few months before I moved overseas. It was coming down to the final week or two and my newly promoted from my position manager was being ridiculously pedantic. It was about 1 AM. I had enough money saved, so I sighed, muttered "oh frick this," took the towel off my shoulder and threw it across the bar, walked out, and have never regretted it. Not me, but a co-worker of mine when I was working in a high-pressure sales department. This man still has legend status, 10 years later. A little background first. The men there would always try to get with the very few women who worked there. They would treat us like sex objects, but I didn't really care. It was actually kinda sad to see. Like they all were these perma-virgins who somehow were also convinced they were the best thing to ever happen to women. So one night when one of the guys, let's call him Brian, brought his wife to a work party, one of the other sales dudes tried to hit on his wife. When I say hit on, I mean he started touching her inappropriately in a drunk stupor. Wife first ignored him and they just leave the party, but he was mad as heck when he found out what happened. FFW a few months. Company is reorganizing and some people had to be let go. Brian was one of them. Brian knew this was coming and already had a job lined up. So Brian goes into this office, gets his notice and walks out. However, Brian did not sit back down at his desk. Instead he walks over to sales dude, taps him on the shoulder and punches him in the face. Cool as a cucumber. Walks to his desk, picks up his stuff and walks out of the office. Never to be heard from again. He deserved that. Don't mess with someone's marriage. Was fed up with all the bulls. Worked in a nursery setting with 5-year-olds. I was basically left on my own with 15 plus kids on many occasions. This one morning people were taking the pee. I had handled handover when parents dropped their kids off, breakfast, setting up the room, running an activity, getting the kids in their coat shoes for the garden, etc. Before lunch, I get the children sat down for circle time for stories, songs, generally calming down. And I said to my colleagues, okay, someone needs to take circle time or come and sit with me while I do it and help keep the children calm. Their response? Why can't you do it? We're busy. Aren't you capable of doing it on your own? They were standing at the edge of the fricking room drinking tea, coffee and chatting. So, I looked at them, finally boiled over the top and went, out of earshot of the kids, frick this crap, I am done. Got my coat, walked out the back to the garden, saw my wife friend who worked with me, said him out, saw her later, out the front gate and rolled on home. Sent my boss a monster of an email calling her on all the crap that had gone down at the place and never heard from them again. Even got my last month's pay after specifically saying don't freaking bother. My wife was P and I was unemployed for 6 months before finding another job, which put us in the crap. So I really wouldn't recommend it. But what I do recommend is finding a decent job with a good employer beforehand. Not one that only sees qualifications and paper instead of work ethic. There are so many horribly run daycares, pre-Ks, it's insane. I worked for a big LASIK practice with a very difficult to work for ophthalmologist. The doctor was having a fit and just tearing into all the staff. We were in the middle of doing about 120 surgeries that day when the surgeon started calling me a coon. I'm Asian BTW. I had enough and walked out along with another person, another Asian doctor, leaving him with no one to run his lasers. Heard every expletive known to man at that point. The rest of the day's surgery patients were delayed until someone was found to run his lasers. Being the coon asses we were, we went and had a celebratory sushi lunch. I was in a team of 3 IT guys. Our boss was an idiot, so when finally 2 of them quit, I was on a brink of quitting too. I went to him and asked if my vacation is still valid, and he said he is cancelling it since the company was moving to a new place and so we have to move all of the computers. I quit the next day. The thing is, we have a 2-month period for leaving in my country, so my vacation was still ruined. I decided to just don't give a crap since they can't fire somebody for poor performance if he quit first. I also said I won't be leaving any documentation and that some of my notes may be missing in the next few days. They blocked my computer account and I spent a month at home for 100% salary cause the boss was worried about the damage I could cause. I also had my vacation and didn't move a single computer. Not really a blaze of glory, but an interesting story nonetheless. In high school I worked at a Wendy's. This store was terrible with scheduling, and I was probably the best cashier in the restaurant. That meant I had to work dinner and close on the busy nights, which meant every Friday and Saturday I was working. This one particular week I booked off a Friday so I could go to a party. The schedule came out and I was scheduled to work. So I went to the manager and told her I booked it off, and she basically said too bad. So I went to an employee who wasn't scheduled to work and convinced them to take my shift. I went to inform the manager, and she wouldn't let me because you are the only employee with enough experience to work a Friday shift. I also worked the Thursday that week. During that shift a customer called my store to tell them what a great job I did. This meant that I were to get a free meal on my next shift. At this point I was sick of working every weekend while all my friends were going out and having fun without me. I went in for my shift at 4 PM, went on my break at 7 PM, took my free meal, walked out of the restaurant and never walked in for another shift again. My buddy and I worked in a warehouse one summer during college. We loaded the trucks with merchandise to be shipped to various stores. On our last day, this was through a temp agency, the belts broke down so the products couldn't come down to the loading area. We were told that our shift, which was supposed to be 6 hours, would be extended to about 12:14. We noped the frick right out of there and clocked out. This is the sweet part. We got in the car and turned on our favorite rock station, which happened to be having a contest for a couple of NFL tickets. We were the first ones there and told the DJ our story. He said if one of us could eat a large pizza right there, we got the tickets. My buddy happens to be a big eater and the way he ripped through that pizza was awe-inspiring. And that's how I attended my first ever pro football game. I used to work at a Fruit of the Loom warehouse. This crap happened all the dang time. Not me, but a guy I knew. We worked in a crappy electronics shop. He decided he had had enough, picked up a 50-inch TV. This was back in 2003. It was worth a bundle, and walked out. No one stopped him since maybe he was putting it in a customer's car or some crap. I never hear from him again. I don't think they went caught onto the fact that something happened. Another person, not a blaze of fire story, at the same shop, was selling copies of her staff discount card. Head office came in to investigate. She wrote a resignation letter on the crap, handed it in, and got the frick out. When I was 19, I worked as a delivery driver for a local pizza place. I dealt with a lot of crap there. The owner was nasty to everyone, would purposely pay me less than I was supposed to get several times and acted like it was accidental. So one day I was scheduled for 11 AM. I came in right at 11 AM on the dot. The owner wanted to deduct a half hour from my pay. I said, you know what? If you don't want to pay me, you cannot pay me at all. And I began to walk out. As I was walking out, the owner begged me to stay. I said, no, you don't want to pay for me to be here when I am. So I won't be here anymore. I continued out the glass doors to my car parked right in the owner's view. I took the light up sign off the roof of my car, placed it on ground and left. Told the office manager that he couldn't arrange a successful Girl Scout cookie drive, leave alone run a business. On the way out, I told him I was going to report him to the state labor board for working everyone 8.5 hours a day without lunch. The state made him cut me a check for 2.5 years of missed lunches. Reaches for calculator. Interning at a tech startup. This was years ago when I was still eager, young, and was gagging to prove myself. The culture was such surfer douchebag bro, it was unbearable. Please note this was in Manchester, England. How can you develop this wannabe San Fran attitude in a place that gets so much rain that at times you feel like collecting 2 of each animal just in case? They needed me to model some financial metrics, funding assumptions, and promised me a bonus payment. Find out bonus payment was just a prank bro through one of the few good dudes there. I had an offer from a bulge bracket bank to start in 2 months. So I made the model. No reason to frick over the few good dudes there, but I password protected the whole sheet in Excel so you could only gain outputs, not change anything in the model. Meaning they would have to redo the whole thing when I left. Frick 'em. San Fran. Supposedly San Francisco is cold and grey. You'd feel right at home. On my last day working at a fast food restaurant, I gave each customer an extra chicken nugget in their orders. I'm picturing this as a free chicken nugget no matter what they ordered. Fish sandwich and a free chicken nugget just tucked inside. Working as material handler, forklift operator, in warehousing. I was also relatively handy with computers and data entry compared to others around this region, so I would lend a hand with that sometimes. A data entry person left the company, and I was asked to help out with that for a few days while also doing my regular work. Few days turned into weeks, and I was struggling to catch up from leftover work each successive day. I could see they were not in a hurry to replace the person I was covering when I was able to do both jobs. No pay increase either. I let management know I was unhappy with the situation a few times, but nothing was happening. I decided it was time to move forward with attempting to monetize my photography hobby, which I had been doing for free a couple of years to build a following. I walked out on a Friday. No discussion, no notice, just left my badge on the desk. They called the next week asking where I was at, wanting to know what they could do to get me to come back. Too late, my mind was made up. I've been running this photography business for 14 years now. We've grown to a team of 7. Been featured on Discovery Channel, History Channel, Travel Channel, PBS, dozens of magazines. I hope this thread encourages people not to stick with a crap job. Life is too short for that. I walked in half an hour before the busiest truck day of the week with a letter that said I was able to find an employer that actually gives a dang about their staff. They then threatened that quitting like this would result in me being blacklisted from working there ever again. He then asked if I still wanted to work my shift. I proceeded to laugh all the way out the door. Not me, but my husband. He worked at the busiest McDonald's in the state. He was their hardest worker by far. He worked clock out but stay and work to help catch up on work. He would take over shifts and he ran the place. He made barely over minimum wage. He worked so hard and cared so much for his co-workers that when he was away from work he talked constantly about it. He even talked in his sleep thank you for order. He was such a great worker that they shipped him around the state. If another store ever had a test to pass they'd send him out to make sure they passed. They always did when he was there. They never gave him time off. When he had a day off it was a sure thing that he'd be called in. He was constantly stressed. Then it happened. I made a mistake that led to our dogs getting in a fight. One of the dogs was very old. Even though I rushed her to the vet, she was too old to pull out of the shock and died. I was beside myself with grief. It just so happened that day was the biggest inspection my husband's store had ever had. The owner of the state's franchise and the top level managers would be there. They were counting on my husband to make the best impression possible. He was going to work a 16-hour shift that day. When my dog died, he had about half an hour before his shift. He called his boss to let him know that he might be 15 minutes late or so because he didn't want me to bury the dog alone. His boss flipped. I could hear him shouting over the phone about how family was always second and had better be there on time. After that call my husband's phone rang every 5 minutes. He was furious. So he grabbed all his uniforms, stuffed them in a bag, and went to the store. The owner and managers were there behind the counter already. They knew something was wrong right away. My husband set the uniforms on the counter and said I quit, in front of every bigwig in the state. His boss was so shocked he couldn't say anything, and he left. Not me but a friend. He worked for a pretty popular water park in Florida that was owned by Disney. After constant complaining about the job he decided that he would end it. His shift was to send people down the massive family tube ride that holds 6 people. Except instead of letting go, he held onto the tube and screamed the whole way down the slide as if it was a freak accident. The family in the tube was mortified, and he was met at the bottom of the slide by manager and was escorted out. Water parks suck. This is hilarious to picture. Actually made me laugh out loud instead of just chuckle. I worked at a car dealership and the mid-level manager started laying into me because I let some guy walk out of our lot after a short conversation. The thing is I asked the guy what he was looking for and he said I want a new Camry and we were a Dodge dealership. He was just walking over to Toyota. We went back and forth for a while and he finally said, you know what, you're just becoming a liability. So I walked over to our PA system and said Chris says I'm a liability so I quit. The GM walked out of his office with a WTF look on his face because I was a top salesman. I looked over at Chris and said over the PA, isn't that what you said, Chris? And he nods sheepishly. I got in my car and did a donut and drove off. Was working at a restaurant and hadn't been there for very long at all, like a week. I'm the opening server that day and start making coffee and getting everything prepped for the day. Old guy comes in, sits down, and orders a cup of coffee. I literally tell him I just started a fresh brew right now so I will be back in 1 moment. I go back to the back and bring said coffee to the guy and he takes 1 sip and spits it out, tells me that I'm lying to him because the coffee is ice cold and proceeds to throw a cup of steaming hot coffee on me. I freak out naturally since my skin is burning and run to get it off of me. Come back to find my manager talking to him, telling him that he's sorry and that he will get him another cup. We walk back to the back together and I demand that the guy be asked to leave and my manager tells me that he's an old regular and he is just like that. I needed this job really bad so I actually swallowed my pride and went out to check on the tables. But get stopped by the old frick and he asks me if I've learned how to make a decent cup of coffee yet. I lost it. Like power level over 9000 lost it. I had tried my best to just roll with the punches but I was officially at frick this. I don't deserve to be treated like this and my manager is a freaking butthole for doing nothing. I take my apron off and throw it in the guy's face. I lean over the table and look into his eyes while he pulls the apron off and I tell him my numbers to clock an R. Random string of numbers I can't remember. If you think you can do my job so much better than me, go get your own freaking coffee, you old sack of crap. I should sue the frick out of you for throwing that coffee on me. Better yet, I should beat the crap out of you. But instead I will walk out that door with the sweet satisfaction of knowing you are going to die soon alone and angry at the world. I pity you. I then promptly told my manager to go frick himself and walked out. The end. Worst boss ever. After 8 years of growth and promotions, she asked me in a coaching meeting, Do you think you can succeed at this? I stared at the ground for 5 minutes while she waited in silence and then replied, yes, easily, just not with you. My brother worked as a grocery store clerk for a very crappy manager. Like, this manager never even bothered to learn his name and had him closing almost every night even though he was a minor. One day he had enough of the BS and quit at the end of closing. And he did so by tearing his uniform shirt in half in front of the boss, and then riding his bike through the store and out the automatic doors, his newly opened shirt billowing in the wind. His newly opened shirt billowing in the wind. Simply majestic. I was working at Friendly's in Mass. I was scheduled to close on a Friday night. There should have been 3 of us. The manager, me and a waiter. The manager was a freaking bee. The manager and the waiter were dating. They asked me to close alone so they could go out. They also asked me to clock them out at 1 instead of 11:30 when they wanted to leave. I asked for $100 cash. They gave it to me from their tips. They left at 11:30. I clocked them and myself out at 11:45 and walked out the front door. Lights on, door unlocked. Dirty dishes still sitting on some tables. Saturday morning I called the Board of Health and told them how filthy the place was. They were shut down by noon. They opened the next day. The manager, the waiter and the regional manager were all fired. This story isn't about me, but my good buddy. He was working at a Thai food restaurant at the time. I was on my way to pick him up when I get a text from him saying to wait a few more minutes. I was already there, so I just parked in the front lot right in front of the store. I see my buddy through the window talking to someone. Then he just storms out the door. Being a 6 feet 3 inches giant of sorts, he slammed the door, causing the glass on the door to fall out onto the sidewalk. He then sprints to my car as the petite old Thai lady comes out the front door shaking her fists and yelling gibberish. Apparently she wouldn't give her employees their checks until they did her personal favors like cleaning her house or office. I'd say she deserves it. I was working at a restaurant as a dishwasher. I showed up to work and the boss did not want me to start because it was not busy. So I sat down in front with her and decided to see how long she was going to keep me off the clock before putting me to work. 2 hours later the place was slammed. I mean real busy, and she said, I think we need you now. So I got up, put my apron on and went in back. I clocked in and out, then walked out the back door, not even informing her that I had quit. The place had to stop serving because they did not have anything that was clean. Moral of the story: don't crap on a guy that does not value his job or the reference from the job. The restaurant had a tendency of ignoring the dishwashing part, and I am sure that it was only when one of the waitresses did not have clean cutlery or plates that they realized I was not there. Not sure if this qualifies, but here we go. In high school I worked at a local tutoring place. I hated it there. The pay was awful, and after joining they started giving us weekly homework packets, 10-12 pages, to make sure our skills were honed for when we had to tutor that subject matter. On a whim one day, while talking to a friend about how much I hated it there, I decided to quit. I drove to the place and told them I'd finish out the month, 2-3 weeks from then, but then I'm done. My boss started bitching me out about how I'm abandoning them and that if I decide to go through with this they will never recommend me to any future employers, and thus I will literally never get another job and I will never amount to anything because of it. She also said I wouldn't get into a good college because of my awful work ethic. I looked her in the eyes, apologized a single time, and walked out of the building. Later that year I got into my dream school, and I've had several very successful jobs since then. It turns out quitting my high school job did not ruin my entire life. I turned my employer in for OSHA violations, left the next day for a unpaid, I was hourly, vacation, and wrote them an email asking them to never contact me again. I worked for a company for 3 years and worked my way up to assistant manager. It was a fairly male-dominated company, and I was one of only a few female employees. There was another assistant, let's call him Bob, and he was definitely one of the boys. Bob threw big parties and was always up for hanging out after work. Bob also did not like to work a whole lot, as in never. He called out sick, had a bad back, broken pipe in his apartment, etc. I was always covering for him, and usually worked 15 to 20 more hours per week. This goes on for a year, and we find out that one of us will be promoted to manager. I assume that they are going to promote me because of how hard I had worked. I was really wrong. I get called into the general manager's office, and he proceeds to tell me that they have decided to promote Bob. Nothing personal, but they felt Bob was more suited to the management role. So I stood up, shook the GM's hand, told him that I was giving 2 weeks notice, taking 2 weeks of vacation, to run concurrent with my notice, and I would be out of my office in 5 minutes. 7 minutes later I am driving away. 4 days later, the GM and the owner of the company are at my front door, begging me to come back. Bob was already not working out, and the staff was refusing to help pick up the slack. I calmly told them no, closed my door, and found a much better place to work. 3 years later I am out with friends and hear that Bob was fired right after they came to talk to me, and that he was not able to keep a job for more than a few months. He was last seen pushing a hot dog cart on a Friday night in the club district. Obligatory not me, but I did have a front row seat. 25 years ago, I was a freshly minted line cook in a mid-scale American restaurant. We have a prep cook by the name of Joe. He was a big guy, kind of slow, was always talking about how he was in the culinary union in NYC working in the big hotels and all the great chefs he worked for. Looking back now I would say he was probably somewhere on the autism spectrum but high functioning. The kitchen manager rode his butt relentlessly to get his work done. This is a key point to working in kitchens. We don't care where you worked or how awesome your other jobs were. Shut up and get your crap done. Which in turn gave everyone else permission to do the same. I come in for my shift one day and there is a Paul in the kitchen. I search out my KM to see what I needed to get started on and he tells me how Joe didn't show for work and his roommate had called an hour before saying that he had a heart attack the night before and had died. Now we all felt like crap because we were so mean to him. The GM wants to send flowers and get memorial service information and asks the sous chef to find out. She knew where he lived. The sous takes a flower arrangement over to Joe's parents' house. Knocks on the door. The roommate answers the door and the sous can see Joe sitting in the lazy boy in his underwear playing Nintendo. Joe is shocked to see someone and admits that he didn't think anyone would care, he just wanted to quit. 2 months later I was working at another restaurant. Towards after my 2 days off I come back to work energized and ready to take on the week. When I walk into the kitchen I run into Joe, who had just started 2 days before. He says hi, is glad to work with me again. He lasts about 3 weeks at this job before he does something stupid and the chef lets him go. A year later I am at another job working as the sous when the hostess comes into the kitchen and hands me a resume and application. I take a quick glance and see that it is Joe again. I can barely remember the KM's name, the sous name, or anyone else I worked with at the time, but 25 years later I still remember Joe as the guy who called in dead. TLDR. Guy calls in dead. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.